and good evening. It's January 30th, 2024, and we're in our next collection of discussions on our Outside the Class series. It's another series from Tim Mackie, and it's called Eat This Book, just because it sounded fascinating to me from the beginning. On TheDustyFeet.com, in the Outside the Class section, we have the Eat This Book source video section set up for review. Because the purpose of Outside the Class is for you to listen to the in-class lecture first. That would, of course, be with Tim Mackie in the source video playlist. With this way of doing things, you can watch the video before we begin chatting. We still hope to keep these to around 15 to 20 minutes or so, because we'll make them easy to catch and easier to catch up on. So, we're going to continue our Eat This Book series with God Brings Life Out of Death, and this is part 2 on Outside the Class on the Dusty Feet. And of course, before we forget, if you find these kinds of podcasts useful, it's when you click the subscribe button. The reminders, they just help you. But also, if you think these might be useful to others, that's when you click that like button, because that is the way that YouTube chooses to share these to more people if they wish. Eat This Book, God Brings Life Out of Death, Part 2. So we left off as Jacob was really ticked off with the rest of the brothers, right? And the way they were treating him and his coat. It was a preference that shouldn't be. So Joseph is out in the field with his brothers. And he comes back and he gives his father, Jacob, a bad report. It's not a term that's ever used in any kind of righteous or upright or truthful information. The interesting part is that we have to figure out the inference because it's not clear. Was the report unjustified? Like Tim mentioned, more, or is it more akin to gossip, slander? Or was it truthful? As in, was this evil story true? How we view that will have at least some impact on how we view the story going forward. As for me, I tend to lean towards the gossipy side. Not needed to get to Dad, but it did, right? Bottom line, it tossed fuel on an already smoldering ember, and we're about to get ready for a bigger event. So, remember, a little bit earlier in the story, Joseph had a dream, a couple of dreams actually. It interests me in the story that it doesn't say that God came to Joseph in a dream and told him something. The inference is that it is from God, and it's an assumed thought. I agree with that, mind you. Yet it does not say that God came to Joseph like it does with the prophets and others so many times later. And when Joseph shares the story with his family, he does not preface it with, God gave me this dream. Because that's not inferred in the story. So I'll even say that I'm comfortable with the dream, as in God did in fact give it to him in his dream. But I'm not sure that it was that Joseph thought it was from God, right? That he believed it was, and the family for sure, they did not take it that way, okay? And we're not even going to get into the dreams of these possible with those iterations right now, right? We just need that they were the dreams, they were shared, and it caused a stir. We see the importance, the relevance of the dreams much later in Joseph's life. We get to those eventually, almost 2 decades later, yeah? But I have to ask the question, did he have to share it then? Did it even need to be shared then? And did it need to be told to his brothers? Could Joseph have kept this dream to himself and pondered it? He is, for all practical purposes, a spoiled 17-year-old boy. Does this need to be shared? Because the dream still does come to pass, and the fullness and width of the history does not unfold, again, still probably another 20 years, but it does happen. But does God hand over Joseph to his own prideful inclination, right? He lets him live out some of his not so good choices. This is messy, and it's an ugly story, and it's wrong on many sides. Definitely more than two. Because even his dad has an issue with the dream, right? Because remember, we're not at the end of the story yet, and it still has yet to come to pass. So do they need to be told the story now? Is it beneficial to them? Is it edifying to them? Is it encouraging them? The only good in this story, it's only seen when you look back on the story. But there's no way for anyone to see that in that moment. For me, personally, I'm not convinced that Joseph's behavior is near good. And the result, although also wrong, is nowhere near a shock. So is this collision of wrongs, this perfect storm, as it were? You bet, I think. And it's one only God could work out for benefit in the end, yeah? Yet we're drawn into these stories. We're intrigued by the behavior for the good or for the not so good. Because Tim mentioned an interesting point. Where's God? Because so far in the story, meaning it seems, he's not mentioned directly at all. We're only seeing the lives as they've played out on their own, right? So Israel, Jacob, he sends Joseph to go check on his brothers again in their grazing herds, yeah? Is Jacob blind to the feelings of his other sons? Is he unaware of the building animosity? Because is this a wise choice of Jacob to send his son out there? Or maybe like Joseph and being given over to his prideful inclinations with the dream sharing, is Jacob just that insensitive to his other son's feelings and such that he doesn't get it? Or maybe it's part of him being part of a deception in his past. So is he blind to the possibilities? This will get more twisted as we go, because Joseph is wandering out there to see his brothers, and they see him coming from a way off. And they already plan to take care of this family problem. Remember, the last time Joseph was sent out to check on his brothers, he came back with that evil report, that gossip gone wild. And then, do we really wonder why gossip is on God's things I hate list? Yeah? Because where it can go. So this action, what we see happening, it's not a surprise at all. If this was a movie and we were watching it, we would see this coming a mile off. Seems they did too. The conversation is so built up with anger and the frustration that the talk is about killing him. It's not about beating him up, teach him a lesson, the brass knuckles, the kneecapping. This is, let's make sure he's sleeping with the fishes. He needs to disappear like Jimmy Hoffa. Okay, well, that does give my age away a bit. The initial discussion goes down a very dark path. They conspire to kill Joseph. You know, if you think about it, that's some pretty deep hate. They are literally that mad, that insulted. But Reuben, the oldest son and heir to Jacob's birthright, he's the one that talks them down. And to literally putting him down a well. So they remove and take that insulting cloak, to them anyways, and they pop him down the well. Then Reuben, he goes off to tend the herds. His plan, right, was only intended to rough up the lad and send him back with his tail between his legs. But Judah, actually he's fourth in line. He takes charge as he sees merchants just going by, and he decides to make a few quid off the endeavor, right? Get rid of Joseph for good, get some coin in their pockets. And then they didn't really kill him, so there's no real blood on their hands. Yeah. 20 silver coins later, Joseph is on his way south, Egypt bound. You know, I wonder what the traders got for Joseph when they sold him to a wealthy Egyptian household, the captain of the Egyptian guards, Potiphar. You know, Tim does not address the return of Reuben to the brothers, right? Because he looks in the pit and he sees that Joseph's missing, and he says, you know, what the heck? Where do I need to go look for him? Then it's weird because then the story jumps to the plan to dip the cloak in goat's blood and show it to their father. Interesting, because it's actually part of their initial plan from the beginning. I love the messy, the fill in the blanks of the cover-up, because it seems Reuben was forced to agree and cover up the sale. And they had to live with that for almost 20 years. Because the plan to sell Joseph, that was not part of his thoughts. Okay, I need to make a brief but maybe important detour here for a bit. Because if you're listening to Tim and not reading along, he skipped chapter 38 entirely. And if you're interested in the Joseph story, you should probably be inclined to skip ahead, since this chapter appears to have nothing to do with Joseph. It's the tale of Judah and Tamar. You know, if this was a movie, you'd almost be confused. Where did this scene come from, and where does it fit with the rest of the story? On the surface, for sure, it does not seem to fit at all. The digression to a story about Judah and Tamar. And yet, in the greater story, like I often use as an analogy, the tapestry of the story of Scripture, and in this case, the part of the tapestry of Torah, this is very much a piece to consider. I'm going to share a story with you about a study I was involved with Rabbi David Foreman and another rabbi, David Schwartz. And it was about chiastic structures, and you know how much I love my patterns in Scripture. But the discussion, which is about an hour and a half long, we have now a section called Additional Documents on TheDustyFeet.com. And under this Eat This Book section, so in case any of you people are interested in listening to it, that's where the discussion is going to be, okay? Because the entire video is worth listening to, but it's, like I said, it's an hour and a half. But to get to the part of the points that I'm referring to, they start at about minute 22, and it goes from there. Because the rabbis were focused around the chiastic structure, and Rabbi Schwartz had believed that he had found and was giving up for peer review to be mulled over. And then around minute 36, Rabbi Foreman brings up the point as to why chiasms even exist. And once one realizes the pattern exists, and this story of Joseph is very much part of this tapestry, it invites you to continue to explore. And I believe also it adds integrity to the entire structure of Scripture. It is with a purpose, right? It matters. You know, one of the main discussion points of any chiasm is, of course, it's the center, the purpose of the chiasm. And the center here is Judah and Tamar. It's the story of redemption, actually on a number of levels. And for those willing to give it a listen, there's a very interesting point made about the 1 hour mark, and it involves the Messiah. I know when I was listening to it live, it caught me by surprise. And it made this seemingly odd placement in the middle of the Joseph story even more compelling and more intriguing. So again, on TheDustyFeet.com, under additional documents, I have the PDF also for this chiasm. And if you give it a listen, Rabbi Foreman mentions the middle of the chiasm not having a pair. And he suggests that the outer edges of any chiasm, and this one too, they are in a sense, they're the pair for the center. And if you listen and look, at least for me, it gave me goosebumps. Interesting to see what your reaction will be, because I really can't encourage you enough to take some time and listen. There's so much to sit back and ponder. Okay, so we slide to chapter 39 and the incident with Potiphar's wife, because Joseph ends up in the household of a very powerful family, and God was with Joseph. And he prospered Joseph, and he prospered Potiphar, his entire house, this Egyptian master. Genesis 39:3 stood out to me. It started there, and then it reflects in the following verses, right? Now his master saw that the Lord was with him, and how the Lord caused all that he did to prosper in his hand. And this Egyptian master, he put him in charge of his entire household, and it did prosper. So God blessed the Egyptian master for Joseph's sake. You know, that's a nice reflection of the part of the covenant promise to Abraham, right? That God would bless those that blessed these people. Okay, here's an awkward question, because I can ask these kind of things. Since the promise of Abraham is now fulfilled here, right? Does it then not need to continue on? Is it finished? I know that might be a bit aggressive, and I really don't intend it to be, but merely to keep open these thought lines that we create, and maybe we're willing to rethink those things, and sometimes in other contexts as well. Joseph is faithful to God, and the master, he's very aware, and he rewards his life of integrity. You know, I've always found this story of Joseph fascinating to look at, and we tend to give it a backwards look, of course, and Joseph did what he did, and look how it turned out. Yet Joseph is living in this story in the direction he's living at the moment in his time and place. His father, Jacob, he raises him and the entire family in the ways of God, the God of Abraham, his grandfather. And then that family threatens to kill you, but then they sell you off to a group of merchants passing by to be sold into slavery. And he's 17 years old. You know, to be very honest, if this happens to me at 17, my reaction to being loyal to my God, that's a very big question. You know, this is real to him, Joseph. And I can honestly say that he took a higher road than I think I might have taken. You know, folks all the time feel their loyalty to God challenged in the midst of trials. You know, I've even seen a few, a good too many actually, that they fall by the wayside, even with friends and families in support in place. You know, yet even if we stay loyal to God, it does not ensure that our circumstances will play out like Joseph. Hence, again, my respect for a young man of 17, ripped from all that he knew, and he kept the faith. No wonder much of our messianic way of thinking is deeply engaged with Joseph. He is someone to explore. And then we get that Messiah Ben Joseph side that we experience in the Gospels. So next week in part 3, we're going to visit the test of Joseph with the wife of Potiphar. And this test will cost him pretty much everything. Again. So thanks for with us tonight for another Outside the Class episode. Eat this book on the Dusty Feet.